Hilma Af Klint. 5 Things to Know About Hilma Af Klint by Julia Voss. Hilma Af Klint painted and exhibited some of the most original abstract works of the 20th century. Hilma Af Klint's evolution as a painter of abstract works starts in 1906. She is 44 years old. She lives in Stockholm and shares an art studio in the artistic centre of Sweden's capital. She is unmarried and has no intention of changing this. For decades, she has listened to voices and seen visions. Now she starts with a series of notebook sketches. Next, she transfers them to canvas. This first series she titles Primordial Chaos, and she restricts herself to the colours blue, yellow and green. In the years to come, she will stick to painting in series. She will create a large body of work, some abstract, some figurative, a lot a mixture of the two. The series will often differ in style quite dramatically. In evolution, for example, the colours are dark and the composition is often symmetrical. In the 10 largest of 1907 to 808, the colours are gaudy and bright, and the manifold forms seem to be in motion, as if they were in a petri dish. In The Dove of 1915, in contrast, the artist develops a very geometrical visual language. Thus, long before Kandinsky, Kupka, or Malevich or Mondrian declared themselves the inventors of abstraction, Af Klint was creating abstract paintings in her Stockholm studio, first in small format, then on a monumental scale. All these series together she calls Paintings for the Temple. There are 193, and they were finished in 1915. The paintings represented a clear shift in her artistic production. Af Klint had been trained as an artist. When she was in her 20s, she studied at the Royal Academy of Art in Stockholm, where women had been accepted as students since 1864. The artist finished her studies with a painting called Andromeda, a depiction of the princess who was almost sacrificed to a sea monster. This won her an Academy Prize in 1888 in the category of history painting. Afterwards, she was known for painting portraits and landscapes in a post-impressionist style and exhibited these regularly in group shows. The question is, what did Af Klint intend to do with the paintings for the temple? Keep them to herself or exhibit them? Contrary to the myth that the artist wanted to keep her work private, she clearly intended to show them to the public. The evidence is the following. First, in April 1910, Af Klint joined the Swedish Women Artists Association. The association was established to support female artists in order to give them more commissions, exhibitions and attention. Af Klint even served as secretary, and her signature can be seen on some of the protocols. She exhibited with this association, but only her academic work in group shows. There is good reason to believe that she hoped for more. She left the association soon after in May 1911. She then tried to find exhibition opportunities by herself. She produced what I call her Museum in a Suitcase, a series of rather small books in which she glued reproductions of paintings for the temple. Now her works could easily be carried. They could travel, and they could be shown to other people in order to convince them to exhibit them. This is what she did. Af Klint travelled in 1920 to Dornach in Switzerland, close to Basel. There Rudolf Steiner had set up the headquarters for his new spiritual movement. The artist took her suitcase museum with her and tried to convince Steiner to show her works in Dornach, in vain. Af Klint and Steiner had already met in Stockholm 12 years earlier in 1908. He had come to her studio and had left unimpressed, and he stayed unimpressed. So Af Klint goes to Amsterdam in 1927. She speaks to people at Wendigen, an avant-garde magazine run by Dutch theosophists. Again in vain. No exhibition was realised in Amsterdam. The next step is London. It is 1928 and Af Klint has applied to attend the World Conference of Spiritual Science. The conference is being organised by the English branch of the Anthroposophists, and she is granted an exhibition space in Friend's house where the conference takes place. So she travels to England by ship. Unfortunately, we don't know what pictures she took to London, but we do know they belong to the Paintings for the Temple series, as the large format is mentioned in letters. The programme for the conference reveals that Af Klint had an exhibition and also gave a presentation on her paintings. It describes them as her studies as Rosicrucian symbolism. What happens after this exhibition? What do the reviews say? Af Klint was left without any response. The reviews ignored her contribution. This resulted in a big shift in her life. In 1932, she decides to gift her work to the future. In one of her notebooks from that year, she notes the symbols +X and explains it means 20 jaar verdocht. All works that carry this sign should not be opened until 20 years after my death. For a long time, Af Klint had wanted to exhibit her work. Now at the age of 70, she understands these works will be better understood by future generations, and she was right. 2. Hilma Af Klint travelled. Travelling was almost obligatory for art students, and so it was for Af Klint. We know that she went to Dornach in Switzerland and to Amsterdam and London, but let me add one more journey, to Florence in northern Italy. When I came across a notebook entitled Italian Journey in the archive, I decided I should try to track down the place where it was made. The book consists only of a few pages, with descriptions and pictures of artworks in places in northern Italy. I went to Florence and stayed in the same hotel Af Klint stayed. She was probably there in 1903, before 1906 and the paintings for the temple. In Florence, from the third floor of her hotel, she sketched the church of San Lorenzo. She carried a Florence guide with her. It is still in the archive. On this trip, Af Klint studied the works of the Renaissance. She was thrilled. She discovered a tradition she saw in herself, and her innovations would soon echo this tradition. In Bologna, in the Pinacoteca Naziali, she sketched a painting by Ludivizio Masolino, Padre Eterno. In the painting, God has closed his eyes and raised his right hand as he touches a large globe with his left. The Holy Spirit is there in the form of a white dove. The cosmos is in motion. Its creator appears to be listening or gazing within himself. This turning inwards is also a phenomenon Rembrandt was exploring in his paintings. His famous work, Old Woman Reading, is among the paintings of Af Klint saw and sketched in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. The phenomenon the old masters were describing was known to Af Klint. For almost all her life, the artist heard inner voices and saw visions. In her notebook entry from 1934, she named and sketched some of them, her spirit guides, Amiel, George, Gregor, and Ananda, whereas Amiel, Gregor, George are Christian names. Ananda was the name of the Buddha's favourite pupil. 3. Hilma Af Klint developed her own spiritual teachings. Af Klint's spiritual education started when she was very young. The earliest document in her archive is from 1879, when Af Klint was 17 and was taken to her first seances. A year later, in 1880, a terrible incident occurred. Hermania, her youngest sister, died aged 10. Hilma Af Klint turned 18 some days later. Her sister's death probably increased her interest in other worlds. The circles Af Klint frequented from an early age experimented a lot. They tried to channel higher forces. They received messages, and they claimed they spoke to the dead, and they were obsessed with automatic drawings and writing. In 1886, Af Klint was directly addressed in a seances, which was recorded by the painter and photographer Bertha Valliers. She is 24 years old and a student at the Royal Academy when, according to Valliers, a spirit by the name of Lawrence introduces himself to her. He calls himself her guardian spirit. A text in the drawing Valliers made on the same occasion reads, "Hilma, you were brought here for this." Finally, in 1896, Af Klint and 4 of her friends set up their own group. They called themselves De Femme, the Five. The group described their own altar, which Af Klint later painted, with a cross and a rose in the middle. They placed themselves in the tradition of Rosicrucians. It is not known whether they had a connection to this secret movement, yet the rituals the Five indulge in are reminiscent of Rosicrucian ceremonies. The women often wore long gowns which gave them a priest-like appearances. Around 1904, 2 members of the group, Af Klint and Anna Cassel, start pursuing their own parallel project. As the historian Hedvig Martin has recently proven in her landmark study, this will lead to Af Klint's temple paintings. Anna Cassel was also an artist and met Af Klint when they were both art students at the Royal Academy. The pair work side by side on their separate projects, and eventually Cassel will produce her own suitcase museum. Cassel came from a rich family and paid for the studio built on Monzo in 1916. Af Klint had given up her Stockholm studio in 1908. Af Klint's spiritual cosmos is expanding, a lifelong process for her. It was peopled with higher beings, vibrations, forces, waves, auras, chakras, elemental spirits, nature spirits, guardian spirits, angels, and gnomes. It revolved around the alchemist idea of reunion of opposites. In her work Tree of Knowledge, No. 5, for example, the yellow and blues stand for the female and male principle that need to be united, as do the light and the dark, the flat and the three-dimensional. The painting also references the unification of world religions. Af Klint's Tree of Knowledge goes back to the ancient Indian source, the Ashavata, a sacred tree under which Buddha gained enlightenment. Because the union of male and female is a recurrent theme, one creature can be found frequently in Af Klint's paintings: the snail. The snails are hermaphrodites, that is, they contain both sexes, uniting the male and the female in one body. 4. Hilma Af Klint had a thorough scientific education. Hilma Af Klint's scientific education started early on, just like her spiritual one. She was born in 1862 into a family of naval officers. If she had been born a man, she certainly would have become a naval officer herself, like her father Victor. Her grandfather, Gustav, charted the seas that surrounded Sweden in his famous Sweden Lake Atlas. Her great-grandfather Eric started this project and was knighted. Ever since, the Klints belonged to the nobility, as indicated by the prefix Af. Af Klint had her grandfather's portrait hanging in her studio in Stockholm. Measuring, calculating, and observing were techniques she grew up with. The symbolism of map making can be found frequently in her work, such as the dotted lines which she employs in The 10 Largest, No. 6, of 1907. Nautical charts are tools that enable us to look into the waters. They make the invisible visible. Af Klint understood her paintings in a similar way. After her academic training around 1900, Af Klint worked at the Veterinary Institute in Stockholm. She was hired as an illustrator for a book project on horse surgery. Her drawings from the time are kept in a small veterinary museum in South Sweden. Again, she worked with Cassell. The big scientific theories and findings of the time also show up in her paintings. One series from 1908 she titled Evolution. 9 years later, she created another series called Atom. One might ask, how do science and religion go together? Calculating and measuring and listening to inner voices and visions, the boundaries between these two domains are often more blurred than we like to think. As Linda Dalrymple Henderson demonstrates in this volume, scientists have often been taken into the spiritual realms by their research. Moreover, the borders of what we consider rational and irrational are worth reconsidering. A majority of Af Klint's scientific contemporaries, for example, believed that higher education made women sick. The Austrian researcher Richard Kraft Ebing was believed to have proved that it could cause nerve damage and even death. The people in the spiritual circles Af Klint frequented did not care about this at all. On the contrary, they believed the future would be more than open to women. As early as 1857, the British author and medium Camilla Newton Crossland wrote in her book on spiritualism, "In the ages that are to come, developed women will be great artists." To compare the two attitudes today, the scientific idea seems irrational, whereas the spiritualist appears rational. 5. Hilma Af Klint designed a spiral temple and searched for a third way. The spiral is one of the most recurrent motifs in Af Klint's paintings. It embodies evolution, energy, change, reunion, joined forces, power, radiance, and revolution. In 1931, Af Klint designed a building for her paintings in just this shape. She was now almost 70 years old, and it was her first big project, although she kept on painting into the 1940s, before her death in 1944. The location which we have determined, Ven in Öresund, she writes in her notebook, referring to the strait along the Danish-Swedish border where Tycho Brahe, the 16th century Danish nobleman and astronomer, had built an observatory. Accompanying sketches show that she had planned. Visitors to her temple were to proceed in a spiral-shaped movement through 3 circular levels built around a central tower. The tower itself had a spiral staircase leading to an observatory on the top. The building was designed to contain her pictures, with the 10 largest installed on the second floor, along with a library. Her plan was never realized. Why do I say Hilma Af Klint looked for a third way? Because that is what her spiral building was. Af Klint knew both art worlds that existed in her time. The Academy on the one hand, the avant-garde on the other. As we know, she quit academic painting more or less in 1906 and never joined any avant-garde movements. Perhaps because, it has been theorized, the avant-garde was then as hostile to women as the academic world. We can ask ourselves, would she have wished for an exhibition, for example, in a Stockholm gallery like Kandinsky? I don't think so. She had always believed her paintings should be shown together. She had a bigger vision, a grand vision. She believed her art would move and enlighten others. Her dreams have never been as close to reality as they were in the spiral of the Guggenheim Museum in New York. It is here that Hilma Af Klint's work could finally do what the artist envisioned, astonish mankind.